I probably only use manual mode 1% of the time. The other 99% I would split to be maybe like 79% aperture priority, and then the remainder is just shutter speed priority, right? I'm here today to just kind of discuss why I don't use manual mode and why I don't think you should too, asterisks. And I'll explain that asterisk later. I have a few different camera bodies I use for different scenarios, right? I have my Lumix G9, which I know inside out can operate that camera in the dark. I've taken some lovely wildlife shots with that, I've taken some lovely sports shots with that, and none of them have been taken in manual mode. Most of the time that camera is in aperture priority mode. So that's AV if you're shooting Canon, or just A if you shoot, I think, on any other system. And the reason that's the case is that gives me direct control over my depth of field. I can then also control my ISO just with the ISO button, and that leaves the camera to decide the shutter speed. Most of the time I don't really care about the shutter speed, and I trust the camera to make a decent ISO selection, and if I want I can go in there and switch that manually. And I suppose that's to do with my style of photography, right? I'm on a tripod right now, but more often than not I don't really shoot on a tripod, unless I'm doing long exposures or a time lapse or that sort of thing. And the reason for that is I just like to move around a bit when I'm taking photos. If I'm holding my camera at a weird angle, I don't want to be changing the shutter speed and the aperture and the ISO just to get the shot. And because I shoot micro four thirds, I pretty much know if I'm at f4, most of the stuff in the frame is going to be in focus anyway, you know, kinda. So what about the times I use a different mode? I'll use shutter speed priority occasionally. So that's S on most cameras or TV on Canon. I only really use that if I'm doing sports photography. And I don't do professional sports photography at all. My brother's in the local Gaelic football team, so I'll go and take pictures of them. I'll just throw it into shutter speed priority because I want a super fast shutter. And I like it if I'm taking a sports photo where someone's kicking a ball, let's say, that ball is completely frozen in time. Because I find if I go for a slightly longer shutter speed, you might get the ball smearing, which can look cool. It can convey the motion of the scene, but then also the people in the scene are also kind of not as sharp as I'd like. So those are the two modes I primarily use. In fact, I've got it here in my pocket. This is my Lumix GF3. I talked about it a bit in my cheapest micro four thirds camera video. You can find a link to that here or here. I don't know where it's going to be because I don't know if this is mirrored or not. And I just carry this in my coat pocket when I'm out. At the minute, I have this paired with the Lumix 20mm f1.7. Stay tuned for a review on this lens. I'm just going to be out shooting with it for a bit more to get a bit of a feel for it. But if you want to see a full review, subscribe and hit the bell, and then you'll be able to, you know, find out when the review's live. It's not got many options in regards to controlling camera settings, right? All we really have is this dial on the back, and yeah, you can use the touchscreen and whatever. So I'll normally shoot with this in aperture priority. In fact, I'll get a shot of this now. If I'm feeling particularly lazy, there is an intelligent auto mode button at the top. I'll just push that and have fun taking pictures. With this body, I don't do any serious photography. Not that I do like super serious photography anyway, but with this body, it's little snapshots. And like, I already take my EM5 Mark II, which I'm filming this on, with me pretty much everywhere. I just stick it in a tiny little bag. I did a video on my everyday carry camera setup. It's changed a bit, might update it. This, I just stuff in my pocket when I'm going on a walk, or if I'm just heading somewhere where I don't want to take a camera bag. I pair it with either the 20mm or the 12-32 by Lumix as well, little pancake zoom. I don't mind popping this into intelligent auto and just getting a few snapshots with it. My EM5 Mark II, which is my like everyday carry camera really, never leaves aperture priority mode unless I'm using live composite to get star trails or some kind of weird long exposures. So why does everyone tell you to shoot in manual mode? Well, let's look at what manual mode adjusts, right? First and foremost, you have your shutter speed, which, if you imagine my finger is the subject, you know, you can choose whether you want it to be frozen in motion or be a bit blurry. So that's your shutter speed. Then you want your aperture, which is your depth of field. I'll get some nice B-roll now of me shooting a subject all the way from like f1.7 to f16 or f22. And then you have your ISO, which controls how sensitive your camera sensor is to light. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but we're not physicists, we're photographers. Knowing what each of those three things do is very important. And you'll notice when I was discussing the modes I do shoot in, I explain why I shoot in them. When I shoot in aperture priority mode, I want control over the depth of field. When I shoot in shutter speed priority, I want control over the shutter speed. You know, you've got your first camera. Let's say it's even something like this. You get your first camera and you post into a Facebook group, got my first camera, really excited, what tips can you guys recommend? Everyone's gonna say, manual mode, exposure triangle. Yeah, that's important to know, but I don't think it's something you should start out with. I think, first and foremost, you should actually just learn how to use the camera. So I use my G9 the most. I can use that camera blindfolded. If I need to do any weird and obscure little thing in the settings, I can find it not a bother. So that's the first thing I would recommend, is actually just being able to go into your camera and say, okay, I want to shoot RAWs, or I want to shoot super fine JPEGs, or I want the autofocus beep and assist light to turn off. They're not super important, but knowing your camera is super important to being able to take good photos with your camera. So what mode would I actually recommend shooting in? I don't think there's anything wrong with shooting in auto just for sort of snapshots and that kind of stuff. Then it depends on the type of photography you want to do. Honestly, I think aperture priority mode is a happy medium for most people, because typically, in aperture priority mode, the camera is going to make sure your shutter speed is not too fast anyway, because if you're shooting on a system that's not stabilized, it's not going to want shaky images. Most cameras, like, you know, you're going to be shooting outside where you don't need to bump up your ISO to super grainy amounts, so it'll just bump up your ISO, it'll keep your shutter speed fairly short. You get control over your depth of field, which means you can blur out the background and do whatever you want. After you've gotten a bit more comfortable with that and you understand the difference between like f2.8 and f16, you know, then try like messing around in manual mode. And I would actually recommend messing around in manual mode before doing serious shoots with it. I've seen a few times in Facebook groups where people said, I'm shooting my first wedding tomorrow, what settings would you guys recommend? As if most cameras have a wedding mode, right? And there's stuff besides the actual like exposure mode of the camera that's important. What autofocus mode are you going to use? On my G9, I have it set so that it's animal and human auto tracking, and I can set the focus point if needed. On my EM5, I have it set to fully autofocus, and again, if I need, I can just tap the screen and use the D-pad to choose where I want to focus. For anyone that saw me here last week, I was just walking around with my EM5 and a macro lens. I was kind of waffling on about that. With this, pretty much the same. I used to shoot fully like choosing my own focus point on the G9. I'd use the joystick or I'd use the touchscreen. But the problem with that is you miss some shots. If you're taking an image of a bird, well, the animal autofocus in most cameras, or even just the regular autofocus, is going to do a decent enough job of knowing that's what you're going to want to be shooting at. As opposed to when I was shooting football games, I would just try and leave my focus point in one of the like thirds on the frame, and then like line the camera up and take the shot, and I ended up with less good shots because I realized that what's more important is taking an image of a scene than making sure your subject is perfectly captured. Other things that are kind of important to know is white balance. Again, not super actually important to know if you shoot RAW files, because you can just change it after the fact. And in Lightroom, you can just like a little tip for someone, right? If you're taking an image of a person and their skin looks a bit blue or green or purple or yellow, there's an eyedropper tool in the white balance section in Lightroom in the color thing. You just take that, go to the white of their eye or something white in the scene, or even just a neutral gray, and it'll just fix that. You really only need to set your white balance correctly if you're shooting video, because if you have an auto white balance, it'll change. So on all my camera bodies, even this one actually, and I never shoot video on this, I'll explain when I do a full actual review of this camera itself, so that if I do need to record a quick snippet of video, I don't need to go in and manually fix it changing white balance during the scene. If you ask a photographer what their favorite part of taking images is, they're not going to say making sure my shutter speed is perfect, making sure my aperture is perfect, making sure my ISO is exactly the right amount, or making sure I expose by a third of a stop to the right so then I can bring it back and I don't have to denoise as much, or setting the white balance. They're going to say that their favorite thing is going out taking pictures. It's like the experience of actually taking the photo, capturing the subject. Editing, for me, is a big part I actually enjoy. So what I am curious to know is what mode do you shoot in, but also what do you primarily take photographs of? I've often said I'm a walkabout photographer, and that's my way of saying I take pictures of everything. Yeah. As for upcoming projects and that sort of stuff, I'm going to be filming a review for the Lumix 20mm f1.7 soon, as well as the 45mm f1.8 by Olympus. I'm going to be making a video on why the 40mm equivalent focal length is kind of popular, because I really enjoy shooting with it. It seems a lot of other people do too, but this seems to be a relatively new-ish trend. I know James Popsis has said like very frequently that 40mm is his favorite focal length. Sorry, the sun is like catching a very frosty, I don't even know what they are. They like ragwort? Like dried ragwort or something? I don't know. Looks really nice. We'll take pictures of that in a bit. So I'm also filming that video on UV filters and whether or not they actually affect your image. I've done a few tests with it for images taken inside and outside, fully stationary. Only thing changing is the UV filter. And yeah, they do change your image, more so outside where there's UV light. So go figure whether or not that change is good or bad. I'll explore that in the video. But yeah, do you enjoy these kind of videos that are filmed outside? I hope the sound and everything's good as well. I'm not using my wireless system because I use that with the EM5 for the intro to last week's video, and it was very loud and distorted. Didn't like that, so I'm back to using a wired one. I kind of like being outside taking pictures, and when it's an early morning like this, I don't mind setting up the tripod to film something. So
Editing Eli here. My battery died at the end of that section I was filming, which is fair enough. It had done like 2 days of shooting pictures and it was out in the cold. That's hard enough for any battery. I want to apologize just for the shakiness of that video. I didn't catch it until editing, and it's ironic. I talk about learning your camera settings, but that was one of my first times filming with my EM5 Mark II properly, and I forgot to turn off the IBIS. So while it was on the tripod, it was trying to stabilize the footage, and that gives you shakiness in the corners. That's why there's a lot more B-roll in this video than usual. But I just want to say thank you very much for watching, and if you've made it to the end of the video, then thank you very much. YouTube's going to show you some videos either here or wherever that I think you might like. Maybe you'll like them. I just want to say cheers. So, cheers.